Welcome to ILTV On The Hour. We're live from Israel with your top headlines from across the region. It's 7 a.m. in New York and 2 p.m. here in Israel. I'm Lidar Lazi, and these are the latest developments. The president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, announced today that Tehran will rebuild its nuclear facilities stronger than before. Speaking to state media during a visit to the country's atomic energy organization, Pezeshkian said it would do so with greater strength. He maintained, however, that the nuclear program is for purely civilian purposes. In June, Israel and the United States bombed Iran's nuclear facilities, with U.S. President Trump saying that the country's nuclear program has been totally obliterated. Trump has also threatened that should the Iranian regime resume its nuclear program, the U.S. could strike again. And meanwhile, Iranian terror proxies are reportedly rearming. On the northern front, the IDF confirmed this morning it had struck and eliminated 4 terrorists from Hezbollah's Radwan force. In a statement, the army said that last night, under the leadership of Northern Command and using the Air Force, the IDF struck the Ramman area in southern Lebanon and eliminated the head of logistics support for Hezbollah's Radwan force in the area. The IDF said the terrorists facilitated the transfer of combat means and engaged in attempts to rehabilitate Hezbollah's terror infrastructure in the southern Lebanon area. This in clear violation of the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon. Following the strike, Defense Minister Israel Katz issued a statement accusing the president of Lebanon of dragging his feet. Katz said the Iranian-backed terror proxy is playing with fire and called on the Lebanese government to uphold its commitment to disarm Hezbollah and remove it from southern Lebanon. According to the U.S.-brokered ceasefire agreement, Hezbollah must fully disarm and its terror forces push back to above the Litani River, both of which have yet to be implemented by the Lebanese government and army. Katz reiterated that Israel will continue its policy of maximum enforcement and said this might even intensify, and added that Israel will not allow any threat to the residents of the north. And speaking this weekend at a conference in Manama, Bahrain, the U.S. Special Envoy to Lebanon and Syria, Thomas Barrack, said on Saturday that despite the setbacks, Hezbollah still retains a major force and is a threat to Israel. He questioned who really runs Lebanon, Hezbollah or the Lebanese government. Let's listen to his comments now.
What's the state? The state is Hezbollah. You go south, Hezbollah gives you water, gives you an education, gives you a stipend, has 40,000 soldiers. LAF, Lebanese Armed Forces, has 60,000 soldiers. The only problem is the Hezbollah soldiers make $2,200 a month. The LAF soldiers make $275 a month. The Hezbollah soldiers have 15,000, 20,000 rockets and missiles. The LAF soldiers are driving old Jeeps, some AK-47s. So which army is which? What's happening here?
And threats not just from Lebanon, but a new report claims that a new front could open up in Iraq. Sources from the IDF's Northern Command told Walla news site that the IDF and Mossad are preparing for a developing threat against Israel from Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been investing significant resources in arming and training Islamic terrorist militias in the region. But it was a reported visit of the IRGC commander Ismail Qaani to Iraq that raised significant awareness of an imminent attack. Reports are suggesting that the main method of attack would likely involve launching missiles and drones from Iraqi territory, following a pattern similar to the one used during the Israel-Hamas war against Israel's home front. Israel is reportedly monitoring activity of the militias in Iraq, such as weapons smuggling and other suspicious activity. And joining us now with more on these latest developments is Major Alexander Grinberg, expert on Iran at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Thank you so much for joining us. So Israel has a ceasefire with Hamas in Gaza and, of course, with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the other Iranian proxies have halted their attacks on Israel for now. But it seems as though the threats are still very much present. I mean, what is your take on this and on Iran's ongoing involvement?
The threats are present, it's true, and judging by some reports, Hezbollah has managed to accumulate some thousands of short-range rockets. It is a danger, but Israel can cope with that. And of course, Iran has never abandoned its attempt to gain a foothold in Lebanon through Hezbollah. And we see now what we see, that Hezbollah is, I don't think Hezbollah is going to attack Israel now because it is not worthy for them, but it is a danger because Israel cannot let Hezbollah strengthen without any hindering.
And what about in Iraq? Reports indicate that the Islamic Republic of Iran is building up its militias in Iraq. I mean, what can you tell us about that?
Well, again, in Iraq, it is a very similar situation when Iran controls an array of various pro-Iranian militias that can operate drones and missiles. But I don't think they will attack Israel. They could theoretically attack the US forces, and in this case, the further development will depend on American determination to strike back on those militias, because I don't think anyone should raise concerns over a possible conflict with Iran, because I repeat it again and again, even before the war. Iran is very weak in terms of conventional military might, because there is, for that reason, one should not fear an open confrontation with Iran, open military confrontation, because Iran cannot do much.
But at the end of the day, you know, despite the US and the Israeli attacks on the Iranian regime, on its nuclear program, the Islamic Republic does seem to slowly but surely, it's rebuilding itself and its terror proxies up. So is it possible that we will see another round of fighting with the Iranian regime? I mean, there are reports that China is helping Iran to rearm. It's clearly investing money, again, its funds in these terror infrastructures. So is war with Iran still likely on the horizon?
I would say a new war with Iran is not likely, but again, of course, we live in the region where one should never say never. So I don't risk with propheticizing. But when you say, rightly so, that Iran is trying to rebuild itself, one must defracture the saying into smaller coins. Practically, they don't do a lot. So yes, they would be happy to rebuild their nuclear program, but it remains possible only theoretically, because under the current conditions, rebuilding a nuclear program would mean to start it from scratch, because it is very complicated. You need tons of money that they don't have. You need know-how, and now, as far as I know, to be a nuclear physicist in Iran is quite a dangerous job. It employs very many networks of smuggling of nuclear technology, etc., etc. It's not, and of course, both Israeli and American intelligence communities will spot those developments. It's not as easy as it seems, or not as the Iranians would be happy to see that. They try to rebuild their proxies, but again, they don't manage to do that, because we have only Houthis that can shoot missiles on us, yes, but it is not as big a danger as Hezbollah used to be before its obliteration by Israeli strikes.
Mm-hmm. And so when you hear statements like we heard today from Iran's president saying Iran is going to build back its nuclear program, it's just empty rhetoric as far as you're concerned?
No, I wouldn't say it's empty rhetoric because we must always be precise with definitions. It does say a lot about Iran's intentions. I'm not sure whether Iran will be able to restore its nuclear program, but it clearly says that Iran has no intentions whatsoever to give up anything of its ideological tenets only, even if it is only about improving alleviating the socioeconomic hardships of the Iranian people. So they're not ready to give up. For example, when the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says that Iran is not ready to direct talks with America, it means that we will have no talks in the foreseeable future. So Iran maintains its confrontational approach, which negates any possibility of arrangement, of settlement, or whatever. But and of course, Iran fearing a reiteration of Israeli or American attacks because Iran cannot do anything because all their air defense systems were destroyed. And theoretically, if Israel decided to launch a new wave of air attacks on Iran, it is possible.
And what's happening inside of Iran? You know, from numerous reports, we've seen the Ayatollah regime has essentially tightened its grip on the Iranian people. What happened to the mass protests that we were seeing, the momentum of sort of overthrowing this regime?
Well, one can say that all the socioeconomic hardships only continue and they accumulating more and more without minimal regime's capacity to even to start resolving them, but because they don't have enough means, even if they sincerely want. And yes, the majority of Iranian people hates the regime, but all that does not mean that most people are ready to stand up against the regime. It's normal because, look, nowhere people stand up or rise up against the regime. If I hate the regime or my government, it doesn't mean I will be ready to fight it. And all the more, one must always hold in mind that most Iranian people are busy with their basic survival, economic survival, and they simply have no time for a specific organized political action. And uprising against the regime is always a political decision and action.
Absolutely. Well, Major Alexander Grinberg, thank you so much for joining us and for your insights today.
Thank you.
And moving on now to Gaza, where the partial remains of 3 bodies handed over to Israel by Hamas via the International Red Cross on Friday night do not belong to any of the hostages. The assessment was made Saturday after a forensic examination at Israel's Abu Qabil Institute for Forensic Medicine. Hamas remains in breach of the ceasefire agreement, which required the terror group to return all remaining hostages, both living and deceased, within 72 hours. But 11 hostages still remain in Gaza. Now, at this hour, Hamas has just announced that it will return an additional 3 bodies to Israel. It remains unclear who those bodies are and if they are, in fact, bodies of hostages. Now, Israel has charged that Hamas knows exactly where all the bodies of the hostages are located, but is deliberately stalling their return in an effort to regroup and regain control in Gaza and delay any demilitarization efforts. On Thursday, Hamas returned the bodies of 2 hostages, Amiram Cooper and Sahar Baruch, the first release of hostages in over a week. And meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, Hamas is trying to reassert its control. U.S. Central Commander CENTCOM released a video showing Hamas terrorists looting humanitarian aid meant for Palestinian civilians in Khan Yunis. The U.S.-led Civil Military Coordination Center, or CMCC, obtained the footage by a U.S. aerial drone conducting surveillance over Gaza. and shows terrorists attacking the driver of a truck and stealing the aid. The driver's current status remains unknown, and despite the damning footage, Hamas is denying its involvement in the event. CENTCOM said that over the past week, international partners have delivered more than 600 trucks of commercial goods and aid into Gaza daily. And over the weekend, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the U.S. Armed Forces, General Dan Kane, visited Israel as the official guest of the Chief of the General Staff, Eyal Zamir. During the visit, Kane and Zamir held a joint situational assessment during which they discussed regional challenges, focusing primarily on the situation in Gaza, but also on future challenges in both nearby and distant arenas. And also over the weekend, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, speaking at an IDF officers course graduation ceremony at the Combat Officers Training School at Bad 1, said Israel will not give up on achieving total victory. This is what he had to say.
אנחנו מחליטים ואנחנו פועלים ככל שצריך להסיר סכנה מיידית לכוחותינו. אנחנו מחליטים ואנחנו פועלים. בסופו של יום, החמאס יפורק מנשקו ועזה תפורז. אם כוחות זרים יעשו זאת, מה טוב. ואם הם לא יעשו זאת, אנחנו נעשה זאת.
And joining us now with more on the latest updates in Gaza is Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Doron Avital, former commander of IDF Special Forces. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So at this hour, we're hearing that Hamas has announced it will release 3 additional bodies. When you hear this, what jumps to mind?
No, first of all, we have to understand that what we know here in those panels is not what the IDF knows. So basically, we have a headquarters headed by Nitzan Alon, and they know exactly to the in the limits of what intelligence can provide. Where are some of those deceased hostages of ours, and what Hamas knows, and therefore they can compute or calculate it and see whether this is whether Hamas is playing tricks or whether he's sincerely trying to bring out those hostages. So we have to trust the IDF and this command that they know what they do, and let's hope that again those 3 bodies would be of our hostages and that they would be brought to respectful burial in Israel.
And I want to ask you, what is the situation inside of Gaza now? Is Hamas continuing to rearm instead of course, disarming as it's supposed to do according to the agreement?
Well, to say the rearm, it's a little bit, the Gaza Strip is contained by us so it's not a question of rearming, it's a question of reasserting their control, their command on the civil population. This is really the strategy. So they have their police, they have the weaponry, the personal weaponry that they can use, and we've seen those pictures. So of course their positioning would be to be in a position in which whenever the negotiation or the next stage is coming, there are still the force within Gaza. There are all those militia, they are trying to challenge them, but they want to be the force. And of course it would be interesting to see whether in the future, whether the next stage would come, whether they would be willing to this prospect of demilitarization, and what will be the forces within Hamas, because we have the Hamas outside, which is more practical and pragmatical about the future, and we have the military arm in Gaza, which is more assertive and more, it's not clear whether they would go along with the next stage.
They still have not released all of the hostages, and that was one of the preconditions, of course, for moving on to the next stage. But U.S. President Trump seems adamant, seems determined to see his peace plan through. Israel is not so optimistic that Hamas will indeed disarm. And so at the end of the day, will Israel ultimately need to go in and finish the job itself, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said just this weekend that it will do if international forces cannot get the job done?
Well, we are fighting for 2 years there. This is not a question. You don't win wars by words. You win them by concrete steps. So the only option which is can contradict or against the option that Trump and his plan his plan would be, of course, to conquer Gaza, to control Gaza, to command Gaza, to have a military regime in Gaza. And I'm not sure this is an option that we are running to do, because this would mean years in staying in Gaza. It means that the reconstruction of Gaza would be on our shift. So it's not clear. So I think what our strategy right now is, of course, to be hand in hand with the Americans and to try to force Hamas in whatever means, by political pressure, but other pressures, also by military means, in the end, to resign their weaponry and maybe some of their command sent to exile. I think this is the prospect that we see, and we have to be very careful step by step, and of course, apply force when it's needed.
And Netanyahu is adamant that the base in Kiryat Gat is a joint operation between Israel and the U.S., that they're equal partners, but many critics are saying that the U.S. has essentially taken over. Is that your assessment?
Well, this is a new situation. I mean, as a military man in the past, I mean, it's not like in '82 in Beirut, we didn't meet Marine soldiers or Foreign Legion soldiers of the French, for sure. They were always in the borders, those kind of interaction. But this is a different scenario, we have to admit. This is a real presence of the American. They're really calling the shots politically or policy-wise, and they really don't limit our abilities to act. But so I wouldn't say we resign our sovereignty over Israel, over Kiryat Gat, if you want. But for sure, we right now have a partner. I don't know whether I will call it an equal partner. I would say a partner, but a very strong partner that wants to call the shots and have a plan and a prospect for the Middle East, which goes beyond Gaza. It goes back to this IMEC, to the whole corridor between India, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Europe. And therefore, Gaza is really right now, from their perspective, the obstacle. It blocks those prospects and the second tier of the Abraham Accord. So they will do whatever they can in order, in the end, to complete the plan. Of course, it's an ambitious plan, and it will benefit Israel if it will succeed. But to complete it wouldn't be an easy task for sure.
And so when will enough be enough? I mean, when will the United States or Israel say, okay, enough, Hamas is playing games, they're not returning the hostages, they're not disarming, we need to go in and finish the job? Do you think it will reach that point?
I think we have to be careful with the word finish the job. What's the job? The job in the end that we are not going to displace the Gazans from Gaza. So the end would be, I said, there's only one, the only option that really can compete with the current option is actually to rule Gaza. And for Israel to rule Gaza, we have to understand what it means. It means to rule the life of the Gazan, and then for years to try to, of course, find all those Hamas operatives that are still there to dismantle the tunnel system. It wouldn't be an easy task, and it wouldn't, also the resources, the financial resources that right now are required, to reconstruct Gaza are such that Israel wouldn't be able to provide it, and nobody else will provide it if Israel governs Gaza. So in the end, the leverage that we really have here is demilitarization for reconstructing Gaza. And this is the plan, this is the US plan, and I think this is the Israeli plan. We are part of this plan. So it would go back and forth. It might some steps would go forward, some steps would go backward, but I hope, and my hope is from when I see the Hamas leadership outside of Gaza, I think they are becoming more pragmatical. But of course, we have those militants in Gaza. It wouldn't be an easy task, and it will involve in the end also applying force, but not in the sense of taking over Gaza and commanding and controlling Gaza for years to come, because this is a task that Israel doesn't want to do.
So I do want to ask, as the former commander of IDF Special Forces, right? We talk about finishing the job. But what would it essentially take, really to dismantle all of the infrastructure that Hamas has spent the past, 2 decades building, the terror tunnels? We hear contradicting, of course, reports, but that many of the terror tunnels are still intact inside of Gaza. So what will it actually take on the ground to dismantle this infrastructure?
First of all, you put the finger on the right thing. I think if there's something that really bothers us, it's people talk about weaponry, but weaponry in the end will limit their capabilities. In the end, this tunnel infrastructure, this underground city of Gaza, this was the operative surprise, and this would hunt us forward if we want to succeed to dismantle it. So I'm saying again, conquering Gaza, military regime, and dismantling this would be a process of years, and I'm not sure it's right now in the cards. But the reconstruction effort that would require in the end to dismantle this infrastructure can be, of course, coupled with applying military force, us or others, might bring this outcome. But clearly, the outcome that we need, apart from weaponry, apart from exile of many of their leaders, would be, of course, to dismantle this tunnel structure underneath, because this is the real challenge. This is the thing, apart from the intelligence surprise, that surprised us in terms of its depth and its capabilities, and it still surprises us when some of those militants succeed to sneak out from a tunnel and shoot at our soldiers. So this is a big, big challenge, sure.
Okay. And I do want to switch gears here for just a minute, and I want to talk about Sde Teiman and sort of this controversy that's happening here in Israel. The military advocate general, Ifat Tomer Yerushalmi, the IDF's former top attorney, has reportedly lied about the probe into a leaked video from the base earlier this year. So I want to hear your thoughts on this. You know, Prime Minister Netanyahu called it one of the biggest PR hits that caused sort of unprecedented damage to Israel and to the IDF. I mean, do you agree with that?
No. Of course, this is a little bit high because he needs it, because it serves his cause. Of course, no question about that. Clearly, she did something she cannot do in her position, and of course, to lie to the Supreme Court. There's no question about it. On the other hand, we have to keep our conduct in terms of the way we conduct either the war or keeping those prisoners in our jails. In the end, we stand to whatever conduct and code that the West or the free world has, and we have to keep up with it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have our alliance, the supportive alliance that we have from the US to the Europeans. But surely, clearly, she did something that she should not have done. But to describe it in this fashion, it's a political case, and I wouldn't take it in this magnitude for sure. For one thing, for sure, when the hostages came back, if there was something that they complained about, was the fact that they were tortured or beaten because of Ben Gvir, the steps that Ben Gvir was applying to prisoners in our jails, or his rhetorics at least. So I would qualify the whole scenario in this fashion.
And do you think that this leak of this alleged abuse that took place, which now is calling into question, of course, saying that the tape was actually doctored. I mean, did this, aside from the damage that it caused Israel in the world, how did this affect, this leak of this tape, how did this affect the IDF, and how does this affect the hostages who were in captivity at the time?
I think in terms of the hostages in captivity, I think the events were more concerned the rhetorics of Ben Gvir. In terms of the IDF, for sure, if somebody, a higher rank IDF general, is caught lying, this of course interferes with the fabric of the code of the Israeli army. An army has to have a code. But the code the code is within our ranks, to tell the truth, but also the conduct of war that we have to be committed to, because otherwise the whole fabric of the IDF might be collapsing. So we have to really pave here the path. And I'm not sure that the political Ashkelon is helping us in this fashion, in this context. But the IDF for sure is one of the most, for sure, right now, the most important organization in Israel. But also an organization that keeps, in many respects, the identity, the core identity of Israel and what Israelis are, has to be true to the old code and to his record in previous wars. We always stood up to the codes. There's always an exception, but we can't just break the code. And this would have to be something that is on the current chief of staff would have to take seriously into account.
Absolutely. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Doron Avital, thank you so much for joining us and for your insights today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap for this edition of ILTV. Stay with us throughout the day for our next edition of ILTV On The Hour. We'll be here as events continue to unfold, and of course we'll continue to follow the release of the hostages. So that's all the time we have. I'm Ladar Lazi. Thanks for watching.